Hey, Bhavya, Lewis, how are you guys?
Oh, pretty good. How are you,
Yeah,
Renald?
thank you. Pretty good.
Lewis, how are you
Very well.
doing? Good to
All right.
catch up again. We had a lovely conversation last time. So yeah, what are we talking today?
So I think we should be talking about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. I think it's really interesting to understand how innovation can drive the industrial growth and also how infrastructure can be put into place in order to bring much more innovation. We talk a lot about circular economy and we try to design the economy to be much more circular. Let's have a discussion today to see how we can innovate on these lines and contribute more to the SDG9, which is about industry, innovation, and infrastructure.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah. Bhavya, I just wanted to ask you, Louis, what are your first thoughts when we start to discuss about industry, innovation, and infrastructure? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
For me, at least, because I come from the consumer tech, it's always going to be tech, smartphones, gadgets.
But for the industry, I don't know, because when you talk industries, it's also always associated with efficiencies and productivities kind of things, right? Isn't it?
Absolutely, that's very true. But I think as we used to discuss in class, that we look at profits, but also we need to look at the purpose. Why does this industry exist? What is the purpose of this innovation? And the profits alone should not be a motivation when it comes to innovation within the industry. So I think in these lines, I think one of the we have, myself and Louis had a really good chance to understand how industry innovation can be applied as specific to the fashion industry. And I think we would like to share something with you, Bhavya, and I think you can also contribute to about what are your thoughts on this. Let's move forward. I think
Sure.
the fashion industry is dynamic, growing, and it's an everyday need. And I think I think most of them would agree with me saying that it's a daily requirement and it makes a huge impact. And as I was discussing with you some time back, that next to the oil industry, the fashion industry is the most polluting industry that we have currently. So I think all our choices that we make, different things actions that we do, are going to really impact the climate, and it has a huge impact globally. What are your thoughts, and do you have something to share?
I think before we started, I think I was telling you, right? I mean, I'm a bit older than you both. So then during my college days, when we used to buy a piece of clothing, that used to last for at least few years, And now when I see the TikTok trend, the social media trend, is like the turnaround for a clothing is not even for a week. The girls, want to like buy new clothes every week. They have this like, oh, I have to look different. And then I look at fast fashion, which didn't exist during my teenage times, where every clothing was expensive and they were durable and they could last for long. But now fast fashion like H&M brands or Primark or even Mango, these are fast fashion brands who look kind of imitate designer wares and then bring them for so affordable prices that consumers have no other choice but to buy it, and they don't last for long. And I don't know where do they go, because the recycling is really challenging. If you see, the materials are not pure cotton, they're polyester. And that all kind of like gives me a lot of concern, and that's where I have stopped buying a lot of new clothes. At least from my point of view, I'm very conscious. I go to vintage stores, I buy those kind of vintage clothing. But yeah, I think there needs to be a lot of awareness around this, because as consumers, we can bring in that change, right? We can consciously say what kind of clothing am I picking, what am I doing, how am I recycling it, and which brands am I going for. So yeah, this is somewhere I think a lot of awareness needs to be, be there in the consumer mindset, because oil, we can't do much, but at least food, clothing is something where consumers can be more conscious.
Yeah, but as we see currently that people wanted to, as we see the Ukraine-Russia war unfolding, unfortunately, we see how dependent is the economy, especially the Western economies, on oil from Russia and natural gas. I think they have not really diversified their things. So I think there could be similar issues when it comes to clothing as well. What are your thoughts, Louis? Just wanted to I think Louis must have really great understanding of the Chinese market as well.
Sorry, do you mind repeating your questions?
I just wanted to understand, Louis. I mean, your thoughts on this.
Well, absolutely agree. I absolutely agree with what Bhavya said, because I used to buy a lot of this kind of cheap clothes because of the fashion thing. The fashion used to change very fast. So that is why I had to catch up with that. So I had to buy many pieces of this kind of fashion, what do you call it, fashionable or popular designs. But actually, at the end of the day, I didn't really wear much of those. I spent money, but to be honest, I just bought it like twice or three times because of the reasons that they were very bad qualities. That's it. And it's kind of waste because I just threw them away afterwards and turning it in fact, because in the first of all, when we were students, we used to buy clothes because they're less pricey, because it's cheaper, but also we pay for the bad qualities and then they threw away. That was such a waste.
Let's have a question. I think I'll just repeat what Ronaldo asked. How do you see the trend in China? Because I have lived in China, where that's where I could find, when I go to these smaller stores in Lohu and all that, I used to find clothing so cheaper that I had like, oh, I have to buy this. I want to buy it because it's just 20, 30 RMB. And how is that in China? Is there a conscious effort in, bringing sustainable clothes, or people are just going haywire, like in the West, buying clothes for the social trend?
Well, I would say in China, people are still, consumers still driven by the prices rather than, and it's more like they will still treat it as a just typical necessity rather than having any kind of social elements in it, because they wouldn't really buy something. But and in my understanding is that they wouldn't take into considerations of any kind of like whether it's of particular recycled material, this kind of thing. They pretty much based on the designs, the preference, the taste, and the price associated with it. And you're absolutely right, because of the China being the global workshop for making all these clothes. We can really sell these kind of clothing pieces at very low prices, but so far, I would say the low prices will not actually make people to buy more, but especially because when the consumers are more picky on the quality as well. But I would say buying, I don't know, for over the years, if the Chinese consumers been bought so many on a national level, the recycling problem is definitely going to be problematic.
Absolutely, that's very true.
I think I want to add one thing, which is like during our MBA studies, we looked at the case study of Shein, how Shein is kind of like competing in the H&M and the fast fashion. It's just a digital brand. It doesn't have any physical presence, and how consumers are just buying Shein products, and nobody knows, where their factories are, how they produce. But, if you go in the US and UK, everybody's buying it for $5, $3. Everything is so cheap, and their growth is great. Shein as a business is surviving, doing great stuff compared to what H&M is doing, or Zara is doing, because they spend a lot of space. There is a retail presence, there's a lot of investment there, but Shein is just blown out of no proportion, just a digital brand, right? And when such companies go bigger, there is a lot of motivation for other companies also to do something like that. So my biggest fear is Shein is already doing that, and if there are more Shein X1 and 2, imagine the kind of stuff it will impact planet, and how this entire fast fashion is going to evolve.
You're absolutely right, because Shein is making this kind of like they would call it ultra fast fashions, fast retailing. It's kind of it's a new phenomenon, because if you can make things at such lower prices, you can actually change the collections or series very fast. You used to do it on a quarterly basis, but now you can literally do a monthly or even weekly basis. But to be honest, making a piece of clothing, no matter how much cost that takes for you to produce it, it still generates a lot of waste, especially in the dyeing, process, because the chemicals used not necessarily environmentally friendly or even biodegradable. Many of these, the waste, the sewage, produce thrown away out of factories into potentially to the rivers. That would actually cause a lot of ecosystem issues, environmental issues, definitely. But because of this kind of ultra fashion, I would frenzy. I would say frenzy is because it's such a demand from the consumer side, right? It's I'm pretty concerned how if such trend, ultra fast fashion going on, how much waste we're gonna make without the process recycling this kind of outmoded clothes.
Yeah, I think I'll just like before and now you get into the other stuff. I just wanted to share my personal experience. So this is like last year or 2 years ago when I was working, like, I went to Zara and they had a recycling program, and I went to them and I said, what happens? Like, what is the program all about? They said, hey, if you have an old jeans, old Zara clothing, come and drop it in this box and we'll probably give you some discount on when you purchase the new one. And I said, okay, that looks like a sustainable project, right? Then when I met somebody at Zara who works, accidentally I met somebody who works at Zara and asked her, what exactly happens with those recyclable stuff? When you take the products from consumers, old goods, what happens? And she says, if the quality is really good, sometimes we just put it on the rack, or sometimes, we just like send them to landfill. They're not really recycled because recyclable is a lot of effort. And the reason why Zara did this is because they want to show that they're doing sustainable projects. It's a campaign-driven stuff. They wanted people to walk into the store again and buy new stuff. So it's really market-driven and marketing campaign rather than trying to do a social impact. So she said, honestly, 2 years ago when she's told me, I don't know if maybe things have changed and they've become more conscious, but that was the evil side that these guys are trying to do.
But is sorry, just wondering, is this recycling program, is there any kind of consideration of the cost of the recycling programs to run? But in fact, not many this kind of like retail brands have this kind of recycling program. Is that because they costly that will erode into their profitabilities, or what is the major concern?
So my understanding about the fashion industry is the way that all the clothing, right? If you take pure cotton and then you like recycle it, it's okay. But if you have polyester and you have other fabrics which are integrated, to break them apart and trying to make them into different threads, it's a very complicated process. So if it is only a certain material, pure silk material, pure polyester material, pure plastic, it's okay. But when they all get integrated, that's what Zara is doing. They integrate cotton 10% and the rest is all garbage. Then breaking them and recycling them is a real big challenge, which is it's a lot of money and effort.
I think one of the reasons why I put Patagonia here is because Patagonia believes in repair. Rather than recycling, they wanted to just make sure it can be repaired, because I think, as Bhavya mentioned, I think it's very complicated process to break these things apart and then do the cycle again. And also, I think you see Mud Jeans' logo; it's always circular. You can see the word circular on that. So I think it's not just from that is the reason why we see innovation in the middle of these two. Like, innovation is really needed. As you design your product, I think you need to design it in such a way that it can be recycled. Otherwise, I don't think you cannot just recycle just because for the sake of recycling. It's not going to be possible. I think as you conceive a business, as you try to conceptualize your product, I think that is exactly where you need to be thinking about recycling and upscaling your facilities and innovation as part of innovation to ensure that you can flexibly ensure the sustainable aspects are being embedded into the system. Otherwise, it's going to become like a checkbox exercise. Yeah, I do sustainability. Yes, I do. And it's not really going to be a long term. It's going to be a very short term thing. So I think it's a good understanding. I also we see one more thing that Louis was talking about, the pollutants. But we also need to be mindful that people are working in these very hazardous industries where they come into contact with chemicals, and some of the ailments that they get because of these dyes are life-threatening, and it's also sometimes very chronic. And we'll also talk about the access to decent work as part of our sustainable development goals. And it also ties up to other goals where we become responsible consumers. So I think I think it needs to be both ways, and we cannot just say that it needs to be much more product driven, but also it should be customer driven. So I think both has to go hand in hand, and not putting all the responsibility on just producers and businesses, but also on the consumer side. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree. I think there's also one thing which is beautifully said, a circular product life cycle.
Yeah.
Even in tech, we are trying to do something like that,
Yeah.
where if a product is if conceptualized, at the end, how can we take some part of it and can be part of a new cycle? Like that's how life journey is. So circular product life cycle is something, fashion industry should find a way into, and they have to be more honest, educate consumers about what is this product about, and when they do campaigns like that, they have to be more conscious. But I think the whole game is all about consumers want something new. And if if you use any H&M products, you put them to wash, after 3-4 wash, the products cannot be even sold. Let's say if it is any decent brand and we take a jacket, that I can resell it for half a price, right? But H&M products after 3-4 wash, they kind of dead. They can't even be worn. And that's where I think producers should be more conscious about what kind of products they're bringing into the market, and how can somebody reuse it for some life, like for a lifetime. I'm saying at least say a t-shirt probably is good enough for 2 years, be more conscious of that, or put a label around it. Yeah, consumers, I think, but don't you think there's a lot of pressure when you go into offices or when you go to college to dress up differently if you keep wearing the same stuff? You also have a peer pressure. And now that we're talking about in midst of pandemic, we need consumers to be thoughtful about it. But at the point, when people are getting over pandemic and trying to live their life normally, they also are left in this dilemma where expensive clothes are super expensive and cheap clothes are so cheaper, where consumers are left with nothing, but everything has become so expensive because of the oil, where they're saying, where do I cut costs now? And I'll go for cheap clothing. Are you guys there?
Yeah.
Ronald? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Ronald, you're mute.
Yeah, that's sorry. I think it's a very vicious cycle, as you mentioned. I think this gets into a loop, and then it becomes really dark. I think we'll just also move on, and I think there are 4 things that I would like to highlight in terms of innovation and infrastructure. Strategy. I think Puma has really good strategy, like 10 for 25 goals. Like 2025, they have 10 goals and they're trying to strategize them. And we see process innovation, like as you mentioned previously, mud jeans bringing in the circularity and fair factories, positive activism. And it's also another one which is like lease your jeans. I think it's a nice concept that if we do not really use, because we don't really use all the wardrobe items that we have. Sometimes we keep something and we buy something and really do not use, but it drives demand, such things. So I think that's one good concept. But when it comes to product as such, we see Patagonia, we had a lot of case studies as part of our classes where we discuss about how the products are designed to be much more conducive to sustainable development. And finally, we see Billings, where we see a trend of outsourcing a lot of operations. But I think Dilling has made sure that everything stays in-house, so that it's becoming easy to employ people, create financial benefits, and also at the same time run a long-term business. So I think we always see, I just try to pin this down on a framework that gives us how can we be planet positive, how can we build a community that is positive, and also businesses that are positive, totally creating a positive change. Yeah, I just wanted to, if you guys have any comments
I have
on
a
this.
question.
Sure,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question. Can you throw some light more on what Puma is trying to do when they say 10
Mm-hmm.
for 25 goals? Have you seen like something that you would like to share, some initiatives from there?
Sure. I think, as I previously mentioned, one of the key things that any business has to do is to embed your strategy goals, and your strategy needs to be driven by ESG. So one of the things that really that stands out of everything in terms of understanding how we need to embed this process, I think it can be an exemplary process, but I think it's going to be very hard. But I think as we mentioned, at least you need to write it down. At least when you start to talk about it, you start working on it. One of the key challenges that we see, Bhavya and Louis, I think both of you will agree with me on this, is the challenge that comes from supply chain. Because you have a lot of different touch points on the supply chain, because your thread comes from some place, it's being spun in a different area. The product itself can touch base with, like, say, 15, 16 countries before it ends up in the hands of a consumer. So one of the strategy innovations that Puma was trying to build up is to have a matrix of key partnerships, and to understand and to keep the supply chain really, really smart and simple instead of overcomplicating the chain. So as we previously discussed about the product innovation and designing for making it sustainable, it also needs to be designed in such a way it has a simpler supply chain. So it is traceable, because I think Louis will agree with me when we talk about blockchain traceability, we really want the product to be traceable. So if you keep a very complicated a process model or supply chain, it's going to be very hard. So that is one of the really good aspects that they were trying to pin it down to. And another thing that I actually found to be very interesting was the product design, the waste that generates during when you design your shoes. You see, like you can get it cut it down. So the manufacturing unit or the a robotic process model that creates it makes sure that all the leather is used and it is cut in an appropriate way that there is very minimal waste. And the use of chemicals, health and safety is one of the things that I really liked about their codes, because it's not just about creating product, but also ensuring health and safety of your consumers, health and safety of your people who are in the manufacturing plants. And I think finally, one really good thing that stood out was human rights. They were trying to bring human rights into their strategy to ensure that they stand for human rights, and they call out abuses. And as we mentioned, we talk about blockchain a lot, and I think one of the key responsibilities that blockchain is going to do in terms of traceability or finding out where your things come from. I think Louis asked a very good question during our initiation. Do you know where your coffee comes from? That's a question you should ask every business. Yeah.
So thank you for bringing the supply chain issues. I actually this is absolutely key, the very critical factors where we need to consider, because throughout like the issues I just mentioned about, like throwing away the pollutants made out of the garments, textile garments factories, right? So once you produce so much like a toxic products in dyeing process, or for example, if we can leverage the blockchain technologies to track down all the making processes, the ingredients, whatever they used into the productions, that would definitely play some role into holding the players, the participants throughout in the supply chains accountable for what they've done. So definitely, this is it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, now that we are on the topic of Puma, I just Googled and I was very curious. And I figured out that they have Puma launches eco-friendly capsule collection. So they have a campaign, or they have a product line which calls Down to Earth collection, and it just starts with 25 pounds. So it is very cheap. And they are ensuring that the products they're sourcing 100% cotton, polyester, leather, down feather, or cardboard. So they are trying to source it from a right, sustainable, supply chain, and they have a product line which looks good, I think. And then I also remember Adidas, when we were doing NFT campaign, I asked one of our classmates what's happening with Adidas. They said that when we make shoes of different sizes and shapes and everything, it might not work for consumers. So what Adidas is trying to do is hey, use an AI, we can understand your taste and design, and you can place an order and then we produce it. So it will probably take 2 weeks for your products to come. So you're not already having a lot of products which probably sometimes don't get sold. They're trying to see, hey, consumers, come on board, use technology to tell what your taste is, what your size is, and we will make it for you. And that way, you're bringing products which consumers will eventually use, and not just mass produce and put it for waste. So yeah, these are some good initiatives that we see from the sneaker industry.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, and I think it is the way forward. As we tell businesses that don't just focus on profits, but focus on the purpose. I think we need to have a similar message for consumers as well. Instant gratification. People want instant gratification. They want the shoes to be bought just like that. I think behavioral change from consumer perspective is very, very key and essential to drive change at a larger level, because you see the business are basically catering to what demand comes from the market. They're trying to satisfy the demand and to satisfy a paying customer who's the foundation of any business. So I really think consumer mindset has to change. Consumers have to become climate conscious citizens, and they need to be much more much more conscious of what is the carbon footprint of every action that I take. Am I being a responsible person? Am I handing over this planet to the next generation in a responsible way? Yeah.
I totally agree. I think one thing that you said, the more pressure we put on the brands, but even consumers should ask for it, right? At the end, the companies should be profitable so that they can feed their staff and the staff can take care of the family. So it's a cycle where even consumers have to be thoughtful and demand the right things. If there are sustainable products and vegan products, go for them and not just demand products. And when there are campaigns like Adidas trying to do stuff, support those initiatives so brands can feel motivated. So it is somewhere, collaborative effort from consumers and brands in order to protect our planet, not just putting the pressure all on one brands or, industry.
I think the behavioral mindset that you talk about is very complicated, because when we discuss case studies in managerial economics, we talk about Nash equilibrium, where if one player is trying to take advantage and then it messes up the entire game. So we need to be very mindful. And I think I also suggest that regulation from the government perspective needs to be also much more stronger to promote these changes and actions. Otherwise, we will definitely see some bad players taking advantage of the situation, or trying to make sure that they sell cheaper prices, which always tries to allure customers towards it.
Slightly a different topic, but I'm just curious, right? Where does that consumer mindset or education happen? In our school, we were never taught. In our college, even at MBA, we don't have that conscious thing. But do you think it makes sense if younger generation, or, of course, the family will put those values in place, but don't you think if a kid is trained in a conscious way to make those product changes and understand like what he or she is going for, do you think sustainable education should be part of the school curriculum, or it's something that you're going to leave it to the society and parents to give it to their kids?
I think Lewis will be the best person to answer this question.
Go for it, Lewis. What do you think?
Honestly, I would say education is definitely important in a way, but it's way insufficient, I have to say. Because given we're living in this kind of, we are part, as consumers, we are also part of this kind of supply chains. Towards the end of the supply chains, this very important thing, I would say, in addition to educations, as well as the increase in people's awareness, very important to create some sort of incentives, potentially economic incentives for people to change their behavior. Yeah, you mentioned about behavior things. I wouldn't say impossible. It is difficult. It's difficult to change people's behavior, but I would say we need to be more creative to design some sort of incentives for people to adjust their behavior towards a more sustainable model or mode. That is very, very important things we need to think about it, because I would say education wise it's not difficult, because it's very easy to tell people what is green, what is not, but how to do it and it's difficult.
Absolutely. So, I could totally agree with that. Yes, absolutely. Like bringing things to action. And that's exactly what I think Lewis is trying to explain. So I think if you can educate them but not bring them to action, so what actually we need to do? Well, I think one of the a good document. It reminds me of a good documentary recently. There was a lot of discussion about homeless people. How difficult it is for them. We need to help them. This and that. We need to design policies to make sure there is no homelessness. And it's like all theoretical. So what happened was they ran an experiment. Be homeless for one day. You have nothing to eat. You have no money in your hand. You have no place to stay. All your basic needs are stripped off. And you're just in the streets. And you just have to spend 24 hours to understand what's going on. And people could not survive more than 5-6 hours. That's exactly where you understand, oh, this is so hard to do. I think in ethics, we learn about the veil of ignorance. When you design something, make sure you have a veil of ignorance and design it for all possible situations. So even when because you don't let any bias affect you. And I think these are the kind of innovative ways in which you educate people, and also at the same time, try to make them feel the pain of what is happening around you. I think that gives them more empathy to understand how things might be affected and how effective you can design policies or frameworks or run a business policy together that can be effective and it can bring change, as Louis mentioned. That's a good recommendation, Louis.
Yeah. I think Renald also put it in a very nice way that it's easy to say have empathy. It's not easy to feel empathy. You know, only when you go through certain kind of feeling where you don't get food for a day, you understand wasting food is a crime. You don't understand it until you haven't felt it, you know, like homelessness. It's easy to say, let's help, or you know, what orphan kids are going through. You will never get it. We can never empathize it. So consumers have to be put into, you know, of course there's conscious effort, but it's really difficult. And when it touches home, especially the pandemic has done that, people have lost a lot of their loved ones. And, you know, where people have been strangled in a certain place, they've realized. And I think it's a very good time where consumers are more sensitive and conscious. And if that can be taken into the next phase post-pandemic and say, hey, we have lived that phase, let's not go back there. We are more conscious, we have more empathy towards humanity, planet. Let's see what we can do, you know? Because I was traveling in Rome and I met a couple of Americans and they were like, you know what, we used to travel like crazy. Imagine, you know, because we haven't traveled for 2 years now, we could see the sky, the environment was so pretty. And we saw the best of the, you know, the world, the beauty of the nature. But now everything is back and, you know, we don't care anymore. So people are forgetting, and that's where we should get back that learnings that we had through pandemic and see what change we can bring into the market and consumer mindset.
Yeah, absolutely, very true. So I think I just wanted to sum up some of the things that you guys mentioned. I think from a business perspective, I think we see business infrastructure and we also see customer interface. I think both have to go hand in hand to create a value proposition. And to support all these things, I think we need a very solid financial model that has implication on costs, the key assets that the business has, the channels in which the business is delivering things, and also the revenue stream that the business is generating. So I think all this put together, I think the value proposition will be much more circular. And I think we wanted to have that sort of a drive in most businesses.
This kind of makes sense to me, yeah. So can you explain, Renald, when you put that financial model, how do you connect this? Can you explain that?
Sure. I think one of the things I previously mentioned that we need to have a product design which is conducive to sustainable development, right? But where do you get the funds to develop such a thing? You need to have a financial backing to ensure that you can do that. So what people, I think, Bhaskar, if you remember, one of the discussion that we had earlier was to how do you transition from being not so sustainable to being sustainable? The transition has to be funded by your financial model. Your financial model needs to be flexible. The way you allocate your cost to the change of this business model is very important. How do you run this change? And then your change that you're implementing right now is going to become your business as usual. So do you have the financial planning to do this? Because we talk a lot about transformations and sustainability, but do you have the financial backing? Because that's the backbone. You can talk about it, but in case if you're not able to really do it, you still go back and fall into the old models of selling cheap goods. So that's a very simple business model to execute, but a really complicated and sustainable model ensuring short-term stability and long-term sustainability is always about designing a financial model which is very stable and helps you to breed innovation, and innovation needs to be centered. So I think one of the famous things that I always recommend is the 3-box solution, where you put into the first box where you run projects in your organization which are efficiency and productivity focused. In the second bucket, you run projects that you want to decommission in the long term, which are not sustainable, but you cannot do it right away. But you have to ensure the first box, your efficiency box, is creating enough value that is powering this decommission. The last one is the sustainable bucket, where you planning to do something innovative and your future lies there. So the first 2 boxes have to produce enough revenue for you, and so that you can run your innovation. Because if you just run the third box just in your innovation lab and your innovation, you're not really going to be sustainable in the long term. So your efficiency, the first bucket or a cash cow, has to be working really, really well, and everything has to be optimized so that you can make the transition, while you have the second bucket where you want to decommission. That has to be slowly go down as your bucket 3 is increasing. So I think it's a very balanced approach. Instead of, like, you cannot turn a business sustainable just overnight, but you slowly plan it. And I think financially planning for it and ensuring that you allocate sufficient amount of resources in terms of financial resources to each of these boxes or buckets is very crucial. Yeah. And I think it's a responsibility of every CEO or a business manager to ensure to see how you're allocating your funds to each of these projects that are either profit or productivity oriented, or something that is decommissioning, something that is not going to be sustainable, and the third one is innovation. I think
I have a question for you.
That's very impressive. Yes. They'll take the consideration of their financial model.
Yeah,
very impressive.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question. So when you talk about the 3 buckets, can you name some companies that you probably have encountered or studied who are implementing this and have seen a great some kind of impact and success in their businesses when they implemented that? Anything that any brands?
I think one kind of that comes to my mind is about GE. When they had a very expensive ECG machine, which is not very affordable, and it can because we see healthcare is one of the most important things when it comes to sustainable development, right? Access to healthcare. So the machine that costs like $25,000 US dollars is not very affordable when it comes to developing economies. So one of the innovations that they did was not just to get rid of the machine, but to slowly invest in machines that you can see. If you go to India and anywhere, you can see the healthcare workers carrying an ECG machine in their hands. It's just 2-3 buttons. Just press start it, and then you get the ECG printed out. It's a very simple model, the beauty of this innovation is that you don't need professionals. You can have anybody taking these machines anywhere. It's portable, and you don't need sophisticated trainings, and it's also very cheap. But what was the beauty of this innovation that happened? After they innovated this in the developing markets, they actually used it again in the developed markets. So this cycle of innovation that happens is beautiful. And because you have trade-offs in every continent you go, everywhere you go, when you talk about sustainable development. That is one of the reasons why, if you do not talk about sustainable developments, you will never really have innovations. And we talk about new cities being developed almost every 3 months. There's going to be a new city starting 2040 or 2050, when urbanization is going to reach its peak. We need more innovation to be more sustainable, or we are going to keep building on cities which are not sustainable in the long term. So we need innovation to drive, and innovation is driven by sustainability. I think we have a lot of young minds amongst us, and I think they need to be much more motivated to build on these innovations to deliver more. And I think thinking long term and using technology are really key to bringing up a change in the society.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think I'm really inspired with the case study that you shared. It's good to, I think, even if in Africa there are people who don't get clean water, and there are startups who are just working to purify the water.
Absolutely.
It's inspiring, and they have put that machine in everybody's home. I'm like, imagine, if we have that machine in our homes, so much of water can be saved.
you can always bring back those innovation from developing world where you have so much of constraint, and then put that solution in the developed markets, and then it's going to save you a lot of cost, and it's going to be also innovative and scalable. So I think it's just driving as you become much more inclusive, as you start accommodating people's needs and addressing and acknowledging trade-offs, we're going to get much more better. Yeah, that's the beauty.
True.
Lewis, do you have any comments?
I just find it impressive. But absolutely. But I'm sure that going forward there will be more companies copying what the good examples we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Because this is I truly believe this is the way that how these companies should transform the existing operating model into a more sustainable one.
Absolutely.
I like the word you use, sustainable innovations. Like there's so much innovations are happening every now and then because the world is changing and change is a facilitator for innovation. But we should talk about sustainable, innovations.
Yeah,
that's something I'm going to take back. That's something I want to think about.
Thank you, guys. I think it's a really good discussion. I learned a lot from you guys, and I think,
great job.
I always learn a lot from you both. And I get moved a lot. That gives me hope that we will be able to do something to this planet in a nicer way.
Absolutely. I think as we start discussing and it kind of impacts our thought process, that's the purpose of having our club, to have a discussion on this regularly, to understand what we can do and how we can have a better world. And despite our busy schedule, I think we are spending time on this. It really means that we kind of take this seriously, and we are trying to promote something that can be sustainable in the long term. That's a good one. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Rinal, for all your sharing beautiful slides. Thanks, Lewis, for your time. Lovely to see you guys always.
Take care, guys.